So are you about to go and film your first wedding, or maybe your first few weddings, and you're looking for some tips and some tricks on how to film the wedding ceremony, how to approach it, where should you be, where should your cameras be, what are the best angles, and what are things to look out for? Well, that's exactly what I'm going to go through in this video as I talk you through how I film a wedding ceremony as a single shooter. My name's Luke and I'm a wedding videographer based in the UK, and I shoot solo, which means when I film a wedding ceremony I'm completely on my own, operating multiple cameras on multiple angles, and it's my job to document that ceremony and capture all the very best bits for that couple. Before we start then, I'd love it if you could like this video and subscribe to the channel, especially if you're interested in wedding videography and becoming a wedding filmmaker and you want to see more tips and tricks in the future. So without further ado, let's jump into it. And so as you can see, I've got a rudimentary diagram here on the table, and what I'm going to do for you today is talk you through two different scenarios, and that's two different types of wedding ceremony. The first type of ceremony is going to be where you have 360-degree access to the ceremony. So this is for your bigger venues or for your outdoor ceremonies. And what I mean by 360-degree access is that you can come down the sides of the ceremony and access the back easily without having to come down the aisle. The second scenario is going to be what I call a closed access ceremony. So that is you're indoors, the chairs and seating run all the way to the walls, and you're going to be pinned front or back once that ceremony starts. And they're the two scenarios we're going to go through today. The reason I've chosen these two scenarios to go through is that these are the two biggest differences in any wedding ceremony. A lot of the ceremonies will look the same, they'll have the same kind of setup regardless of the venue you go to. Okay, so let's dive into the diagram and I'll explain what's going on and how it's going to work. So I'm going to talk you through everything that happens from the moment I enter that ceremony room to when I leave it. So that's micing the groom up, talking to the registrar, find out if there's any extra readings, looking for the best angles, setting up the tripod, actually filming the ceremony, what bits can I film, what bits can't I film, and all the way up to the point where I leave that room and that ceremony's done. That's what I'm going to go through in each scenario. So as you can see, the model's in front of me. So I'll just quickly explain the model. So at the top you've got your altar or your table, that's where the wedding's going to happen, okay? That's where your bride and groom are going to be stood in front of that at the head of the room. To the left hand side of that, as I look at it, is another small table. That's going to be for your second registrar. In the UK, you have one registrar that conducts the ceremony and you have one registrar that conducts all the legal proceedings for the ceremony, and that's where they're going to be sat. The orange bars indicate seating, and that's where your guests and family and friends are going to be sat, and the blue cones at the bottom here are the entrance doors into the ceremony room, so that's where the bride's going to walk up from. Okay, the first scenario in this instance, as you can see, the seating doesn't go all the way to the edge of the paper. Okay, we'll take the edge of the paper as walls to the ceremony room, but there's access down the sides, and therefore we can have 360-degree access around this room. We can walk down the sides and access the back, walk back up the front. But you want to avoid walking up the centre aisle here, and that's for a very good reason. Obviously, if you choose to do it, you can, but for me, I think it adds a level of unprofessionalism that I don't think needs to be in there. You've got to remember, this wedding is for the family and friends of that couple to see that couple get married, and you don't want to be in the way of that. And I find that if you walk up and down the centre of the aisle, you're a distraction, you're in the way of people watching what's going on, and I just don't like doing it. So I will do my very, very best, unless it's an absolute emergency, to stay out of that centre aisle, stay out of the view as much as I can of the people watching that ceremony, and just document it as best I can. I've got a couple of cutouts here of people that are going to be involved in the ceremony, and this is for most ceremonies, these people will be involved, and they're people you need to be aware of when you're going into film ceremony. The first people that are going to be in the room are obviously the guests who are already sat down, and you're then going to have your registrar. So your registrar is going to be sat front and centre, and they're going to be welcoming the guests, inviting them to sit down, doing any announcements, all that kind of stuff. Your second registrar is going to be setting up on the table, and they're going to be sorting out all the legal paperwork. So who else is going to be in the room? So you're going to have your groom and your best man. Now typically and traditionally, the groom and the best man will stand on the right hand side of the ceremony. There's a traditional meaning about this to do with swords and fighting and protecting the bride. It's a story for another day, but traditionally grooms stand on the right hand side of the ceremony, and that's important to remember for your camera placement, for your tripod at the back. This is where you need to start reading the room, because not all weddings will follow this kind of tradition. A groom will not always stand on the right. People, if they don't know that tradition or they're not following that tradition, the groom could be on the left quite easily, and then all you have to do is 180 the room on how you're going to set it up. But for this instance, it's a traditional British wedding. Groom is going to be stood on the right. Okay, next person you're going to have in the room is the photographer. Okay, denoted by a yellow, and as you can see, the little triangle that's coming off is the direction they're shooting in. So you've got the photographer. They're going to be in there and they're going to be bouncing around, taking snaps at this point and getting some guest reaction shots. So I then come into the room. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to walk up to the groom and say, I've already introduced myself at this point, he already knows I'm there, but I'm going to say, hey, I've got 10 minutes to go before the ceremony, I'm just going to mic you up, and I'm going to put my microphones on him, make sure the recorders are set up good to go, make sure he's happy with the placement, explain to him, look, don't be nervous, don't do anything you wouldn't normally do, you don't have to do anything special for the recorders, they'll do their job, you just do what you need to do and they'll capture you doing that, you don't have to worry about it. I'll then go up to the registrar. Hi, I'm Luke, I'm the videographer. Can I mic you up for the ceremony? It's for the wedding film. Normally they're okay with it, and so what I will do is put a Sony TX650 onto the registrar. Normally I just slip it into the blazer pocket they've got. If it's a female registrar or celebrant and they're not wearing a blazer, they're wearing maybe a jumper with no pockets, I need that recorder fairly close to where they're going to be speaking, but they've normally got a clipboard that they read out of. There's quite a lot they've got to read, so just clip it on the inside of the clipboard and then they're obviously speaking over it. They speak quite loudly, celebrants and registrars, because they're addressing a room, so that's normally not a problem. That then gives you a second audio feed of the registrar speaking, which then makes obviously them very clear on the wedding film, but it also then acts as a backup. So if the microphones on the groom would fail, not that they ever have, but if they would fail or they have a complete mare and a complete shutdown, at least there's another recorder in close proximity to the bride and groom doing their vows that I will be able to extract that audio from, and that's why I mic up the registrar. The groom I've already mic'd up, and he's going to have a Tascam DR10L, fantastic little recorder, and a TX650 as well as a fail-safe if the Tascam was to go down. Not that it ever has, but I like to have redundancies out there. It's important to note at this point, you need to note which side the groom is going to be on, because that directly impacts how you're going to mic that groom up. So, reasons why. For this instance, the groom being on the right-hand side, the bride is going to be on his left. Throughout the ceremony, they're not going to be facing each other the entire time. There's going to be points where they're both facing forward and they're side by side, and so you want that microphone as close to the bride's side as you can, so that if there is a little laugh, a little joke, anything sort of, any reaction that the bride gives, it gives that microphone a chance to pick that up. And so for this instance, I would mic up the left-hand side of the groom, but if the groom was on the right-hand side, I'd do my best to mic up the other side. Obviously, when they turn and face each other, it doesn't matter what side that microphone's on, it's going to be picking up the bride who's only a foot away from him. It's more for when they're facing the same way, and that's why you mic up one side, not the other side. So what I'm then going to do is I'm going to head to the back of the room and I'm going to start setting up the tripod. So I've got video angle 2. So where do I want to be? Now with side access weddings, it's a little bit easier because you normally have a bit more play to find a nicer angle. So sometimes you can find an angle over here, especially if it's an outdoor wedding, you can go for a bit of a wider angle, get a side profile shot. You could come all the way back if it allows it to, depends what way the bride's coming in. So if she's coming in here, obviously she's going to come down the aisle, but it depends where she's coming from to get to that aisle. You could have, you know, a tripod sat way before so she's not looking at it. The last thing you want basically is the bride to walk along and the first thing she sees of her wedding ceremony is your tripod. It's pretty garish, it's very unprofessional, so just try and hide it as best you can. So where would I place it in this room? Well, it's going to be at the back, and I'm going to situate it on the right hand side shooting forwards. Now I know what you're going to be saying, you're going to be looking at this going, well surely you want it on the left hand side so you can shoot through and capture the groom. And that would be true, except for how I approach and film these ceremonies. So this tripod is going to go on this side and it's going to be on a wide angle. So normally I'm on a 30mm prime at the back on manual focus. I'll manual focus off the registrar and get a nice wide caption of that room or that space, and then leave it. You don't need to touch it. Manual focus, it's not, the lens isn't going to go hunting. You just leave it to record, and that's all it's going to be there for. You want this as high up as you can get it and angled slightly down, and that's to stop any guests who may stand up during the ceremony. It's to stop them blocking the view of your camera. So as high up as you can get it, obviously safely. You don't want it, especially if it's an outdoor wedding, think about sandbagging the tripod down, because the last thing you want in the wind is your camera that's 9-10 foot in the air crashing over and whacking guests on the head. So always be safety conscious, but I'm going to stick it there. The reason I've also stuck it there is when the bride comes in, she's going to come straight down the middle of the aisle. She's not going to see it. She's going to walk straight past it and not even notice it's there. She's going to be concentrating on what's ahead of her. It does mean I will probably struggle getting the groom's face. I might just capture it in the corner of the shot. However, I'm going to be at the front. So I've set that camera up and I'm now going to come around and I'm going to start getting groom shots, and what I'm doing is getting the groom reaction shots at this point before the ceremony starts. So I'm getting him shuffling his feet, I'm getting him looking up in the air, I'm getting him big blowouts, you know, he's nervous, he's waited months and years maybe for this day, like he's excited. You're getting that feeling into the film, you're trying to get his emotions onto camera. So normally I'm quite tight on his face, might try and elevate the camera a little bit and shoot down and try and get some of the guests in the background chatting, and that can help build the suspense of the film. The photographer's obviously going to be bouncing around and taking the same kind of shots. I will speak to the registrar when I mic them up and say, hey, can you give me a 2-minute heads up of when we're good to go? I don't want to, are you good to go, let's roll. I want a 2 minutes before. Give me 2 minutes to set up all the cameras, make sure everything's working, and we'll go from there. She gives me the nod, Luke, 2 minutes to go. So what I'm now going to do is go all the way back down, hit record on this camera. The reason I say go back down and hit record is I don't know what cameras you're going to be filming on. I'm guessing if it's your first wedding, you won't have a very high spec camera for your second angle. If you've got a good camera, it's going to be with you as your A camera, not as your B camera. You may have rented a camera, you may have borrowed a camera from a friend, and the chances are that this camera at the back is probably going to have a 29-minute, 59-second record limit. So obviously if your ceremony goes over that, you've got to be conscious of the fact that at some point you've got to come down, hit that record off and hit it on again to start that recording process again. So you want to leave it as late as you can to hit record on that second camera on the tripod to give you as much time into that ceremony as you can. Now a lot of shorter ceremonies will be done in 15-20 minutes, you don't have to worry about it, but the longer ceremonies that go on, just be conscious that when you hit record, have a glance at your watch, right, I've got 25 minutes here before I need to start thinking about how I'm going to make my way back down to the tripod and reset the camera. So I've hit record on the camera and I'm now going to skirt back up the side, come here. And then what I'm going to do, depending on how big this table is, I could potentially go behind the table or maybe in front of it. And what I'm now doing is I'm trying to capture the groom's face in the left-hand side of the screen, and as I'm watching down the aisle. At this point, it would have been advantageous as well if you've had a chance at this point to speak to the photographer and be like, hey, I'm Luke, I'm the videographer. You probably would have met each other that morning anyway at bride prep, and you just say to them, look, hey, this is how I like to film. I need to be in this position at this point. Does that work with you? Can we compromise? Can we work around each other, type of thing? So I would have spoken to them, and hopefully they're okay with being here, or maybe they want to be directly on my shoulder. Normally at this point, if you ask the registrar, they will move slightly out of the way. They'll take a pace or two to the left or right, depending on which way you want to go. And so normally there's enough space for you to get in there. Now I don't mind giving the photographer centre of aisle, because I'd rather have a bit of the groom's face in there, because I can do a nice pan shot from the groom's face in focus with the background blurred out, and as I come centre of aisle I can rack that focus in on the procession coming up, and it's a nice transition in the film. So I don't mind giving the photographer centre of aisle. So here come father of the bride and the bride, okay? And they're going to start walking up the aisle. Now remember, at this point the registrar has probably asked the congregation to stand up. So this is why you need this camera elevated and looking down to get the back of that shot going through. Now, why would you ask, is the back shot of that important? There's a couple of reasons. One, it's a safety angle. Okay, so if you're filming on your A cam and something goes wrong, it starts to go haywire, it knocks itself out of focus if you're using autofocus. You need to change settings because you've got it exposed on the groom rather than on the bride down here who's maybe a little bit too dark, so you've got to change the exposure settings quickly on the fly. You can cut to this back angle, and if you've got a good enough angle, you can make a seamless cut in that film, and your couple will never know that mistake happened. You can kind of mask that mistake. So that's why it's important to have it. And it's also just good to have different angles, because from this point, these guests are going to be looking back at the bride. And so this angle can get, especially on this area here, which is tends to be the bride's family, can get a really nice shot of the bride's family turning around and looking at her as she comes up the aisle and smiling faces, and that can be a really nice thing to have in the film. Now this back camera I always have on 4K 24, which means I can crop in 4 times as well and still have HD quality, so I can get nice and close on those faces if the camera's picked it up well and it's been situated right. And that's a really nice thing to have in the film, is people smiling back at the bride as she's walking up the aisle. So the bride and father of the bride come all the way up, and then they're going to go next to here. At this point, as soon as the bride meets the groom, you need to be moving, because the registrar is going to swing back in to the centre and take over the ceremony. So at this point the photographer will dip out because they don't need this point, they're going to move with you, and the registrar will move back into the middle. Now what if I've got enough time, and what I mean by enough time is sometimes the bride will get to the front and there'll be a bridesmaid that runs out to sort her dress out, she'll want to give her flowers to someone, she'll be saying hello to the groom. That maybe gives you 15-20 seconds to make your next move and pitch up for the first bit of the ceremony. Now ideally where I want to be is over to this side. Why do I want to be there? Because I want to be getting the bride's face. Okay, now appreciate at this point everyone is facing forward, okay, which is what the little points denote. They're all facing forwards. Registrar starts doing her spill, and what I can now do is concentrate on the bride's face, because she's the most important thing in that ceremony at that moment. She's just had a big walk down the aisle, she's just had a big moment on the wedding ceremony, she's just met her groom for the first time on their wedding day. They're going to be looking at each other and smiling and happy. There may be tears, it may be quite emotional, and you want to get that emotion in the film. So I'm now tight on the bride and groom's face, predominantly bride but groom as well, because they're both facing forward. Photographers probably still going to be bouncing around, but 9 times out of 10 I'd say they go opposite to me. They don't really want to get in my shot and I don't want to get in theirs, so they're quite happy to go opposite. Registrar will then, who brings this woman to be married, father of the bride will say me. Father of the bride then kisses his daughter 9 times out of 10, they'll have a kiss and a hug, and then the registrar will invite the father of the bride and the best man to sit down. And this is where you can mask your movement, or what I call masking movements, and that is you use a natural movement within the room to move yourself and not make it obvious that you are moving, if that makes sense. If everything's quiet and it's just the bride and groom speaking and you move, it's quite an obvious move. Whereas if everyone's moving, or people are expecting some form of movement because people have been asked to sit down or move or come up for a reading, people then aren't tuned into you moving because they're concentrating on someone else's movements, if that makes sense. The registrar will now say, thank you, father of the bride, best man, you can now go and sit down. So they're going to go and sit down, and we'll just take them out of the scenario because they're now sat on benches. As they sit down, the bride and groom normally shuffle around a bit, they may be looking at each other after the bride has given her father a kiss. So you loiter in this position as the bride goes to kiss her dad. As they kiss on the cheek and they hug, you're filming. As soon as the dad turns to leave, you don't need to film that bit. Everyone knows what it looks like for someone to walk to a chair and sit down. So at that point, I'm moving, and I'm going to switch angles and come next to the photographer. Sometimes they'll come with you, sometimes they'll have got what they wanted and they'll move back round and start getting different angles. But I will move round next to this registrar's table and I'll start doing the shot. Now why have I moved? Predominantly I've moved because the first person that's going to be speaking is the groom. You know, when you do the I do's and do you take this person to be your lawfully wedded husband, wife, blah, 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 blah. It's the groom that speaks first. And so that's why I want to be at this angle, because I want to be shooting over the bride's shoulder on the groom's face. Now there's 2 trains of thought of how you film couples getting married. You can either film the person receiving the vows, or you can film the person making the vows. I prefer to shoot the person talking, i.e. making the vows, because the reaction of the other person is just them being read out. I know it's emotional for them, but sometimes on film it can just look a bit blank, because especially if people find it awkward, which sometimes they do. Whereas if someone's talking, they've got something to concentrate on because they're talking. It's a bit more of a natural look. So I will always try and film the person talking rather than the person receiving the vows. And so I'm going to film the groom saying blah, 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 I do. If there's enough time now, depending how quickly the registrar's speaking, if I can make it back round to this angle to get the bride speaking and saying I do, then I will. If not, I will just shoot it static from where I was originally. And at this point, there's normally quite a lengthy spill, probably 2 or 3 minutes now after the I do's. Sometimes it comes beforehand actually. There's a bit of a spill that the registrar or celebrant will give, either about the couple or about marriage or about something to do with that. It's like a little story type sermon-esque type thing. So what you can do at that point, if you're confident enough you've got the time, is to come all the way down the ceremony, because at that point you don't need to be filming the bride and groom because it's just the registrar speaking. You come across and you can move this tripod angle into the center if you're confident on it. That then gives you a nice centered look of them getting married. Okay, but some ceremonies I choose not to do this, some ceremonies I haven't got time to do this. It's very much like you have to decide there and then if you're going to do it. So let's say for instance I haven't done it, we're just going to leave it there for now. And so I am up here filming away, and photographer, let's say, is here photographing. And then it gets to the vows. At this point, the registrar will say to the couple, you want to turn and face each other and hold hands. So they're gonna turn in like that. And they're going to be facing each other and they're going to be holding hands. Groom's going to go first. So you want to stay in this angle. You may want to creep forward depending what lens you're on. So I'm on a 28 to 75mm Tamron 2.8, near enough the entire time on the ceremony. Just because it gives me that nice bit of reach if I need it. If I can't get as close as I want to get, I can put it all the way up to 75mm. And if that isn't close enough, because I'm on an A7 III, I can put it into crop sensor mode and get a little bit closer on with that as well. So I'm going to creep forward to this edge of this table, and I really want to be over the bride's shoulder, directly on the groom's face, and I want the groom's face to fill that frame. I want him to be the dominant feature in that frame. I don't want to film a wide angle and lose him in it and lose him to the crowd. That moment's about him. He's making his vows to the bride, so I'm tight on his face. And you'll know when he's coming to the end of it. It starts getting to the end of it, the vows, and then the registrar will say, right, and so, now it's your turn, are you ready? And as she's saying that, your hop sticks round next to the photographer, and now you're tight on the bride's face. And you do get the bride doing her vows. And this is where you're going to stick now predominantly for the remainder of this part of the ceremony. So the photographer's probably at this point going to be loitering here because they like to get nice artsy shots over the registrar's shoulders of the couple with the background, fine. But for video, because they're speaking, the speech is the most important aspect of that film. Your wide angle at the back is getting the room for you to cut to if you want to have a bit of B-roll or a bit of a look at what else is happening in the room. But fundamentally, the feature and the feature of that moment is those brides and grooms speaking. So I'm tight on the bride's face. And I'm going to stay in this position now until the registrar or celebrant says, and I now pronounce you husband and wife. At that point, they're going to come together and kiss. So they're going to move a little bit closer in. As they move in, I'm going to sweep in, and hopefully the registrar does the same thing where they take a couple of steps out the way. And I'm going to take a couple of paces forward just as they kiss, right? And that gives a really nice effect on the film that you can slow down, especially if you're filming in 60 frames a second. So as you rush towards them, it then gives it this big epic like build moment that you can put into the film of the crescendo of bang, and we're married. That's a great moment in the film. So from here you actually get a little bit of a breather, because especially in the UK, you're legally not allowed to film the actual signing of the register. So you have to turn your cameras off. So registrar will now say the happy couple are now going to come and sign the register. So please chat amongst yourselves, blah, 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 blah. So boom, moving all the way down the outside. If I've hit the record limit, I'm going to just quickly check. I've got a couple of minutes now, so I can quickly check that it was on in focus. It all came out all right. Skip through the footage. Yep, oh, looks good. Okay, and what I'm going to be looking at then down here is whether or not the angle is going to work for my exit. And what I mean by that is, do I need to move that angle? Has there, for instance, been a group of guests that sat in the back corner that blocked that angle that I didn't know about or I haven't paid attention to? I should have done, and it's worth checking, you know, where people sit and stuff. You know, it's something I would check, but just on the off chance you haven't, check it, because then you might have lost portions of the first bit of the ceremony, but there's no reason to bury your head in the sand and just lose the second half. Quickly review the footage and be like, right, that angle actually works all right. At this point, you need to start planning what kind of exit you want. And it depends how you're filming. Are you filming handheld, and so you'd prefer a static shot of the couple walking back down towards you? Are you on a gimbal so you're a bit freer to move around and get those stable shots of them moving? Depends on the wedding ceremony, depends on the couple, depends what they want from the film. So in this instance, I would be on a gimbal. For majority of ceremonies I film, I'm filming on a gimbal because I like adding motion into those shots. I like having movement in the shots. I think it keeps it interesting, especially when people are just sort of stood talking to each other. I know it's big for the couple at the time, but to keep the film flowing, it's nice to add a bit of movement here and there as and when it's required. So because of that, my plan is going to be in the centre of the aisle and track back with the couple. There's no point having this angle here because all it's going to do is get the back of my head. And when I speak to the photographer about this, 9 times out of 10 they want to do it with you. They want to come side by side and track back with the couple. And so all this angle is going to get is the back of me and the photographer walking back in front of the couple. You're not actually going to see them. So what I normally do at this point is shift this round to the side or off to the corner, again as high up as I can get it, and I try and get a side view of the ceremony. And I appreciate people are going to be standing up, but my tripods are tall enough that I can normally get the brides and groom's faces and this entire side worth of smiling happy friends and family. I can get that as an exit shot, and I only need it for a few seconds if I miss the main shot. So that's what that shot's going to be there for. So I move the tripod over. The bride and groom at this point are going to be one they're signing the register. This registrar is going to move, and the bride and groom are going to be sat either here or they're going to be doing it on the centre table. Either or. Photographer is going to be here getting reaction shots or chatting to the registrar. So I'm going to come back up and I'm going to check my exposure at this point for the tracking back shot, because if you've got a big window here or you're outdoors, you know, you've changed the angle for that camera. So just check before and be like, right, I know I need to be this setting, this ISO, this aperture, I'm happy with that. Just so that you know you're ready to roll when everything gets going again. At this point, it doesn't matter if you go up in the middle of the aisle because everyone's chatting to each other. Like I said, the bride and groom are busy, people are watching them, people are chatting because they've not seen each other in a while. You can get away with this at this point. So I would have checked that, made sure I'm happy. I'm then going to go to the front and maybe off to the sides, and I'm going to start getting some guest reaction shots, some guest interaction shots, because I'm not legally allowed to film this part. But that doesn't mean it's dead time. It doesn't mean it's time wasted. So I then start bouncing around, make sure as well, when you think about it, the importance level for that wedding goes front to back. So the front 2 rows typically are the most important people at that wedding because they're the closest friends and family. They're the parents, the grandparents, the kids, best friends, all that kind of stuff. So you want to concentrate on the first couple of rows and just get people laughing, smiling, joking. If you can get a couple where people are looking forward, that'll help you out, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And you're getting all these shots and bouncing around while you're waiting for them to sign the register. Now you heard me just say they can help you out, and this has happened to me on a couple of occasions when I was really starting out and I didn't really know what I was doing, if I'm completely honest. So I'd left the particular occasion this happened, I'd left the back camera on autofocus, right? Shouldn't have done it, but it happened. I was in a bit of a rush. There was a lot of traffic getting to the ceremony. I had about 3 minutes to set up. I couldn't even mic the groom up. I didn't have enough time. So it was just slap the cameras in and go, and the bride was walking down the aisle. So the back camera was on autofocus. What I didn't realise until I got the footage back was that the lens, about a third of the way through the ceremony, then started hunting. And it hunted for the rest of the ceremony, so it just wouldn't pick up focus. It wasn't focused on anything, it was just going backwards and forwards, and the footage was pretty much unusable. And it did that for probably 3 or 4 minutes. During that 3 or 4 minutes, I obviously moved with my A camera, I bounced around a bit, I changed exposure levels, I changed focal lengths, and so my, not mistakes, but my workings were in that film. And when I got it back, I was like, there's just no way around putting this ceremony together without putting what are fundamentally my mistakes in there, and the couple having that in their film forever. So then what I did was I took the guest reaction shots I'd taken at this point of the ceremony and just overlaid them on the bits of the ceremony where both my cameras weren't playing the game. And so, you know, bride and groom would be speaking, you leave the ceremony audio up, and then you just slide in a picture of mum and dad smiling, and then you slide in a picture of grandma and grandma smiling, and then you slide in an uncle making a laugh or a joke. And makes that film look a bit more natural, and it then masks your mistakes. So there's a real benefit to doing this and using this time for your benefit. Then what's going to happen is the bride and groom are going to get up and move. The witnesses are then going to come and sign. So witnesses are going to come up, they go and sign the register, and then what happens is that the bride and groom are invited back. So they move off, bride and groom are invited back, and now the photographer will go in and start taking their shots, because now this is the mock shot. So legally you can now take photos and video of the mock signing of the register, you just can't do it of the real thing. I get a nice pan-in shot of them signing the register, and I normally try and do this when the photographer's got them posing off to an angle. You've got to remember, photo and video work a little bit differently to each other, and what you don't want is poses on video, because it looks awful, it looks really staged. But what you can get is a more natural look. If the photographer is getting the couple to pose, you film that from a slightly offset angle, and then what you're really looking for is the few seconds before the pose and a few seconds after the pose, and that's the bit you want to use. So as I start coming in, and the photographer might be going, right, and give each other a kiss, they're going to look at each other and smile and like giggle and maybe be a bit embarrassed. Then they're going to go into the actual pose as you're going forward, and as you reach the end, they're going to come out and they're probably going to laugh at each other and be like, oh my God, isn't that embarrassing? You know, maybe a few of the guests are laughing with them as well. As you're still tracking in, then you come back. Now what you don't want really is that middle pose. You can still use that shot if you want to, if it's a nice shot, but it's that laughter at the few seconds before and the reaction a few seconds afterwards, and that can really start giving you this emotional film, bringing that film to life and make that film personal to that couple. So that's why I do that way. Okay, so then what's going to happen is your witnesses are going to come back, and they normally like a picture together. So the witnesses will be on either side. Registrar will move out of the way, and there's normally a picture of the four of them. Everyone's seen these kind of pictures before. More for the photographer, you can get a few shots if you want. I don't tend to use this kind of stuff. I tend to have one sort of sweeping pan shot just to document that moment, but it's not, again, it's a lot of posing by the photographer. It doesn't really work well for me and how I like to film my films. I just sort of get it as a bit of documentation and I move on. At this point, the camera goes off, and then the guests are going to be asked to come forward and take their own photos if they wish to, normally. And so you then have a flurry of guests that come to the front to take a picture of the bride and groom. Not a lot of point in you capturing this. You might be able to get a few sort of laughter shots, but realistically, there's not a lot that's really going on. Everyone's more concentrating on taking their own photos. So at this point, I'm going to chat back down, grab the photographer and say, look, I'm going to chat back down. I'm going to wait in the middle of the aisle here. So one tip I will give you at this point is that if you have missed the first kiss, so I now pronounce you husband and wife, and that first kiss, say you were at a bad angle, say you were on autofocus and you went out of focus for that shot, like say for some reason you've missed that shot, or that shot hasn't come out how you wanted it to, this is where you can mock that shot up again. So all you need to do is, as the guests are going to come up and start taking pictures of the bride and groom, you go over and you say, hey, when you come back down the aisle, when the registrar says, welcome to the world, the new Mr. and Mrs. blah 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 blah, just walk towards me, and then I'm going to put my hand up. I want you to stop, take a kiss, stop in the middle, kiss, everyone's going to cheer, it's going to be really great, and then come towards me again. Okay, and they'll always oblige because they're really happy at that point. Okay, and what happens then is, as you put your hand up and they kiss before they come down, the registrar is going to be sat in the middle of the aisle. They are going to be, right, let's get this sorted out. So they're going to be facing down this way now, because they're going to be walking away. Okay, if you ask them to kiss now, okay, what you've effectively done is taken the moment of the first kiss and just moved it to a bit later on. So they now have a kiss. They're not going to notice in the film that everyone stood up clapping them, because everyone cheered at the time it happened anyway. So that means you've then got a second shot of getting that moment if that moment did go wrong. And I only say this because it's a big moment. It's a big moment in the film. It's a big moment for them. It's one of those shots you need to have. So if something did go wrong, don't bury your head in the sand about it. Be like, right, how do I get around this? This is how you get around it. So they then turn and they're going to start walking down, and everyone's going to be cheering and clapping. Now what I'm normally going to do is I'm going to sit about 6 foot away from them. I'm normally between an f4 and an f8 depending on the room. and I'm just going to keep pace with the photographer. I'm constantly talking to the photographer. Remember, you don't need audio at this point from the camera because everyone's cheering, right? And the groom has got his microphone on, so that's what you're going to get the cheering from. And you're just going to track down. I'm just saying, yeah, I'm going to keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, and you're going to track them all the way out of that room. And so that is the ceremony done. And so you may be then saying, well, what is the difference between this scenario and the next scenario? Well, if this is a longer ceremony, so there's obviously different types of ceremonies, but say for instance this is a church ceremony that's going to go on, it's a religious ceremony, it's going to go on for maybe an hour, hour and a half. That is a long time to be filming at one angle or at the front for. And so the advantages you get from a 360 degree access wedding is that you can come down, you can get these guest reaction shots down here, you can film back at the couple up the sides, and you can make it all the way around. You can move this tripod in the center if you wanted to. It just means that you can move freely around this room and give yourself a bit of creative control about how you want certain portions of that ceremony to be filmed. It also gives you the advantage of, if you are working with a photographer who's a little bit, let's say, unprofessional and just keeps wandering into your shot and is hell-bent on ruining your footage, and I have had it a couple of times, then it gives you the option then to break away from them and do something completely different, because they're not going to be coming down here in a hurry. They want to be up here where the action is, and you can just film from a distance and get your longer telephotos out and have a good old time on the wings and the sides. But that's the advantages of having a 360 wedding. But it just gives you that freedom to be able to come around and sort everything out with the camera. It gives you the freedom to get extra shots and not have to use that center aisle. And it just means you can be a little bit more elusive. You can be a little bit more hidden within the ceremony, because you don't have to keep cutting across the front if you don't want to. Because like I said before, when I was switching between at the front, I was going around. You can, if you have time and you don't want to do that, you can come all the way down the outside and up around there. You'd have to be pretty quick. And for me, I just don't think it necessarily works. Especially for British weddings, a lot of them tend to be quite fast paced. This actual ceremony can last less than 20 minutes. And so if you're taking a minute and a half to get round and set your camera back up, you've missed a big chunk of that ceremony. I think your safest bet is to probably stay off to the wings. And like I said, when people are giving you those opportunities for those masking movements, when the registrar is speaking to the bride just before she says her vows, are you ready? Do you want to put your flowers over here? Father of the bride, do you want to sit down? Best man, do you want to sit down? All those types of things, as those little moments happen, that's when you can be switching around. That's when you can be dotting yourself over, because they're bits of the film you can cut out, because you can speed that bit up. No one needs to watch that happen. And then you'll cut yourself out of moving around up here. And so that's scenario one, where you had access all the way around, everyone was happy to be mic'd up, and you got good sound quality, and the photographer was on board. So let's move on to scenario two. So we'll clear all our little friends off and we'll go to scenario two. Now, as you can see, the seating for scenario two runs all the way to the edge of the walls, and there is absolutely no way of getting down the sides. So the problems you're going to have with this kind of ceremony is, once the bride and groom, or once the bride enters the room, you're either going to be stuck at the front or you're going to be stuck at the back, because you don't want to be transiting up and down that centre aisle. It's just a distraction for everyone, and it just looks a bit unprofessional. This also is then going to affect how you film the exit and all that kind of stuff. So let's get on with building this. So we can have our registrar up here doing the legal stuff. We're going to have a registrar in the middle. We're going to have our groom. He's going to be sat there. The best man's going to be with him, keeping him safe and sound and sane. Bride and father of the bride are going to be down here ready to go into the room, and you're going to have the photographer up here. Okay, so in this scenario, I'll throw a few other curveballs in for you to show you what else I would do in certain situations. So in this scenario, the groom has a bit of a meltdown and the groom doesn't want to be mic'd up. You spoke to him about it before the wedding, and you've said to them, hey, to get the best sound of your wedding day, I need to put a microphone on you. You know, I have it written into the contract that they have to sign when they book me, saying that if they choose not to be microphoned up, then I can't be held responsible for any loss in their audio quality. So I've gone up to him, hey, remember me, I'm Luke. I'm gonna whack a microphone on you. No, you're not, mate. I don't want to be microphoned up. I don't want any sort of recording of me at this moment. Okay mate, not a problem, don't worry about it. We'll find another way of doing it, okay? Don't stress the groom out at that point. If he's that stressed, he's obviously got enough on his plate without you then going, yeah, but in the contract you said this, right? Doesn't matter at that point. Do the best you can. So what I would then do is transfer what I would put on the groom to the registrar. So I go to the registrar and be like, hey, groom's having a bit of a panic. Can I put the microphones on you for the ceremony, please? 9 times out of 10 they're going to say yes, because they want the groom to be nice and calm. So then on the registrar I would put the Tascam DR10L and the Sony TX650. The reason being is that I can, with the Tascam being so good, I can extract the audio probably just about enough to get the bride and groom speaking in a good enough quality for that film without it being on the groom. So I would then mic up the registrar. At this point, let's say that there is also 2 people doing readings. So these purple witnesses are now doing readings. So I go back to the groom and best man, hey, has there been any change since I last spoke to you? Is it still so-and-so and so-so doing a reading? Yep, it's still just those 2. Right, can you point those people out to me, please? Best man will take you over. This is so-and-so, they're doing a reading. Hi, I'm Luke, I'm the videographer. I'm making the film for X and Y. Can I just put a little recorder on you so I can hear you speak when you do your reading? It's just for the wedding film. Most people are quite happy with it. That's where your TX650s come into play, because they just slot into on the top of a dress or a blazer, very discreet, no one's going to know they're there, and you then get crystal clear audio of that reading. So I then mic'd up both the readers. I'm then going to come in and set up my angles. Now for this, what I would normally do in a room like this is try and get my tripod as far over into the corner as I can. The reason being is not for any sort of it's the best angle, it's more of a safety, I don't want people tampering with my camera thing. If the chairs are pushed all the way to the walls, the chances are it's a very cramped venue, because they've obviously used all the space to get as many chairs in there as they can. That then raises the chances of there being people stood at the back of the ceremony room because they've run out of chairs. What you don't want is to have your tripod here and a guest comes in late, or all the seats are taken, and the guests either pick up your camera and move it so they can get through, or they just shift it down, or they start tampering with it, or worse still, they move it out of the room because they can't see their friends getting married. So by putting it right in the corner, again, as high up as you can get it, looking slightly downwards, over the top, you can then make the best of that scenario. People aren't going to move a camera that's in a corner. They will move one if they need to get to the corner to be able to see that wedding, if you follow my drift. At this point, it doesn't really matter what side of the room that tripod goes on. I would say you could either stick it on the right hand side so you can get across and get the bride as she sort of lands at the top, or you can come this side and concentrate on the groom's face for the entirety of the procession coming up the aisle. That could be your shot onto the groom's face as he turns around. It's completely up to you, and it completely depends on the room, because these rooms can either be very long and thin, they could be quite wide but still have no side access. These are just ideas to get your brain working into where you kind of need to be at what point and why. So I'm then going to go back up to the top. I'm going to do my groom thing again. So I'm going to shoot past the groom, get his little reaction shots as the bride and father of the bride start tracking up. Now, as you can see, photographer will probably move up here as well. These aisles will probably only be, in this type of venue, only big enough for 2 people at any one point, which is why I've done the models the size they are, to prove the point that once the bride and groom are sort of proud of this, you're going to have to squeeze past them and probably brush against them or move the bride's dress out of the way to be able to get down the aisle, and therefore it's not doable. It's just going to be a massive distraction. It's really unprofessional, so you are stuck at the front. So it's the same kind of sketch. The bride and the father of the bride and the best man are going to sit down, so we take those away, and you're going to be around here. You're going to go round here and get the groom speaking. Now the registrar is going to be here. Now, with the registrar being mic'd up and the groom not being mic'd up, you are going to have a little bit more work in post, because registrars and celebrants tend to be quite loud. They're used to project into a room, and so they're going to be quite loud. So the auto leveler on the Tascam is going to balance that out, but then the bride and groom are going to be a little bit quieter. So you're going to maybe have to chop and edit the footage a bit more and the sound a bit more to bring the bride and groom's levels up to make it all sound the same. Okay, the reason you want to be over here is that normally if someone's doing a reading, then there'll be chairs over to the side. Okay, and the bride and groom will be invited to come round and sit in these chairs. Can't spin round. They'll sit in these chairs, and then the readings will be coming up, and they tend to stand on the opposite side. Now, there's no good way of doing this, there's no right way of doing this. You can either, what I tend to try and do is ask the registrar at this point for any readings to just move back out the way, and I will come sort of on this back corner where the photographer is and get the side of their faces as they speak, because they'll naturally turn a little bit towards the bride and groom, and you can therefore get most of their face. But they're obviously going to be speaking mainly to the room. So what you don't want to be is stuck here, just getting the back of their head as they speak out. You want to get a bit of their face. So you need to come around here. But what I don't like doing is going behind the bride and groom and shooting between them, especially if it's quite tight at the front. They give them their room, it's their big day, and people are still going to be looking at them, and the last thing they want to see is you with a big camera coming between their shoulders to try and get a shot. So just here is fine. You could even say to the speakers beforehand, look, when you get up there, I know you might forget, but if you could just turn 45 degrees for me, that'd be fantastic. Most people are fairly compliant. They want to make the bride and groom happy. And I would shoot that way. This camera at the back, then on a wide angle lens, you've got to remember everyone else is sat down at the moment, should then be able to capture that speaker and the bride and groom. Now granted, you're going to be in the shot, but there's nothing you can do about that. This is a documentation part of the day. I know there's lots of videos out there that say you should never get in the shot, you should never be in the wedding film. Do you know what? Some venues just don't lend themselves to that kind of thing. I don't beat myself up about it. I explain how I'm going to film to my couples beforehand and be like, look, there are going to be points where I'm going to wander into shot. There are going to be points where I'm going to be at the front and the back camera will have to pick me up. It's just how I do it. I will mask it as best I can, but due to the venue you've chosen and how I film, it's probably going to happen. Most people are alright with it. Like, not everything has to be perfect. It has to work. It has to look good. It doesn't have to be perfect. And so that's how I would get the speaker. The speaker then comes down, sits back down. Do that again for the second, because at this point either the second speaker is going to come up or the bride and groom will come back out. They'll do a little bit more of the ceremony, then they'll go back. And all I do then is, as the bride and groom come back out to the front and the registrar comes out, I switch back to this angle, and then I'll go back to this angle when the speaker comes back out. So let's move on to the end of the ceremony, because everything else now runs effectively the same as the first scenario. You just film away, move in depending on who's speaking and depending on what room you've got, and we'll skip forward. They've done the sign on the register, you've still gone along, you've got your guest reaction shots, you've got some smiles and all that sort of stuff. So now we're going to look at the exit, a different type of exit. So because this venue is so small, the chances are I'm going to be on a monopod. I'm not going to take the gimbal because there's no point. I can't get enough movement in that gimbal to make it worthwhile. I might as well go handheld and get a bit more handheld and monopod shots and have a bit more of an intimate feel to it. So let's get the speakers gone. Registrar is going to be here. Okay, bride and groom are going to be down here. So during the interval, I say interval, it's not a show, is it? But during the sign of the register, you can then go down the middle of the aisle, because the bride and groom will be over here doing the register. Everyone's focused on them or chatting, so you can come back down, sort your cameras out. At this point, what I would have done, so let's leave the photographer there. I'm going to move any guests that are here at this point. I'm going to ask politely to move, and I'm going to move this tripod so it's just poking out, just slightly poking out from the aisle. So it's got a clear shot. When everyone stands out, it's got a clear shot down the aisle. What I'm then going to do, I say that, you don't want obviously a leg of a tripod just overhanging the aisle so people can chip over it, but as best as you can, get that camera angle so that it's shooting down the aisle, so it's got a free run, free look at the bride and groom. I'm then going to come with my first angle and do the exact same on the opposite side, okay? And then I'm going to ask the photographer to sit slightly, ever so slightly forward, so they, again, give them centre of aisle, they'll love that. Let them sit slightly forward and be, look, I'm going to get this from two angles then walking down, which gives you the aisle to work with. Please don't go forward at this point because you'll be on my films. Normally they'll respect that. And so as the bride and groom come down, I'm then static on two angles. I've got two angles. This angle, my tripod angle, is still going to be a wide, and the angle I'm on is going to be a tight on their faces. and it gives you two perspectives of that moment. So if you don't have a gimbal or a stabiliser, or the room doesn't allow you to take a gimbal or a stabiliser, this is another way you can film the exit really well without losing any detail quality or having too much shaky footage. You just stay static, and as the bride and groom come down, the photographer will track out with them, and you literally just stay there. And you just stay there, and once they're out the room, camera's off, pack away, you're done. And that is filming a ceremony. Okay guys, I hope you found that helpful. Obviously there was a couple of different scenarios there. I went through some stuff that you maybe hadn't thought of before. Obviously I designed this tutorial mainly for people that had never filmed a wedding before, or had only really filmed a couple. And it wasn't, it was never designed to be a be all and end all, this is what you must do, this is gold standard. It's just to get your mind working in the type of things you need to be thinking of, to, especially if you want to become a professional wedding videographer. It's the things like trying not to be in the guest's way when they're watching their loved ones getting married. That'll give you a bad rep. People will talk about that. It's things about how you can use different types of shots and movements to create different feels. How you can work alongside the photographer and use the photographer's poses and work and how they're doing their stuff without interfering with them, and use it for your own gain. So when they are posing the couple, film it. But remember what I said, you're looking for the few seconds before and a few seconds afterwards. That's the bit you want, the nice candid bit. That's the bit that looks great on film. I talked a little bit about how to mic people up for ceremonies, what I would do if certain people, like the groom, don't want to be mic'd up. Something I didn't go through is that if you've got people doing readings on ceremony, and this works especially well in churches, if they're doing a reading and they're all going to walk to a lectern or a certain point in the room as a base to do their readings from, you can also put a recorder on that base, on that lectern, just as another audio source to make sure you capture them. This can also be a good idea if you haven't got a lot of time pre-ceremony and you know there's a good number of people doing readings, or you think they might throw some random reading, like someone random might get up and start doing a reading, which I've had before. It's good to have a recorder just sat there where they're going to be doing the readings from. You know you can capture it then very, very clearly. Make sure you communicate with the photographer. It's far easier to work alongside them than it is against them. A lot of them are very understanding. They do a very similar but again very different job to you, so there'll be points where they'll take a couple of photos and move around the room, whereas obviously you're rolling from the moment that bride walks into the room to the moment she leaves. You're rolling pretty much, bar the sign of the register. So just chat to them, get along with them, try and help them out, they'll help you out. It makes it so much easier, especially when you start getting into the smaller, tighter venues. If the photographers want to make your life a nightmare, they really can. So it's really a benefit to get along with them. Make sure you do speak to the registrar. Registrars are very accommodating. If it is going to make a big difference to your angle, say, hey, when you announce the bride's coming in, can you just 2 steps to the right just until she gets in, and you can come back. It just gives me that little bit of extra wiggle room. Normally they will more than happily oblige with that, and I think the biggest thing is communication. Obviously the more people you can communicate with on the ceremony day, the easier it's going to go. If you can look up before you get to the ceremony room, if it's a venue you've not filmed before, I'm aiming this obviously more at people that have only filmed a few weddings or not filmed a wedding before. Go online, look at the venue, look at the room, look at videos and photos of that ceremonies at that room before. Where were the angles done from? Where were the tripods sat at? Where were the main cameras put? Where were certain angles? Where was the light falling? Where's the light going to look good in the scene? Like, all these things you can sort of pre-prepare before you turn up to the ceremony. Obviously I've done this scenario with 2 camera angles, and I would suggest if you're filming your first couple of weddings, you may only have 1 camera. I would strongly suggest you go in and either borrowing a friend's camera or just renting a camera. It doesn't need to be anything too drastic, just as long as it films 24 frames a second, and you can leave it on a tripod and it'll film for at least half an hour, and you've got a little bit of knowledge of colour grading, or you can colour match it with LUT, then I would highly recommend doing that, just because the safety it gives you. It just takes a little bit of pressure off you on your first view, because you know I can take a couple of seconds to sort my camera out because the camera at the back's got it covered. I can be cut into that right now. And you've always got to be thinking of the film. It's not about filming this process, it's about how are you filming this for it to look in a film. And it's the film that's the important bit. No one really cares how you film this bit, as long as the film looks great. And people will only care about how you film this if the film starts looking terrible, which I'm sure it won't do, because you're here watching this video, which means you're interested in improving your skills. And if more videos like this are something you're interested in, if you want to learn more about filmmaking, if you've got any ideas for filmmaking, then Please like this video, please subscribe to the channel, please let me know in the comments if there's anything you'd like explaining, if there's any videos you'd like to see in the future. It's going to help me steer this channel and give you more content that is worthwhile to you and give you more stuff that you want to see. So thanks very much for watching. That is, in a nutshell, how I film wedding ceremonies. I hope you really enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on the next one. So thanks for watching, goodbye.